Welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest. Her name is Rosemarie. She goes by Jenn Francis. Today is going to be talking all about podcasting. She's the creator and host of two podcast tools of the podcast trade, and she's familiar with all of the frustrations, all from start all the way to finish, growing it. It's not a small task, and I'm happy to have her on the show to bring onto the listeners interested in podcasting. So, Jenn, welcome.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate you having me on.
What's interesting is we connected through Podmatch, and you're actually your podcast is one of the top 100 podcasts in marketing and nonprofit on Good Pods, and so we can talk about and then so tell the audience about your story, origin story, how you got started, and we'll get into it.
Okay. So I want to talk about Solo Moms Talk first, which is my first podcast, because that was my training ground for tools of the podcast trade. And I had this idea to start this podcast because I was a divorced mom, and it's a frustrating life being left with to raise two kids alone. And for the longest while, I thought I was alone. So that's where the idea for Solo Moms Talk came in. But the struggle to start from idea to launch was like 6 years because, I fussed and, I kind of have this OCD moment when I'm doing stuff that's new because it has to be perfect, right? And so I finally launched in August 2019, and I've done everything myself. I did the research, I learned to do it, and then I do the editing, and I did the sourcing for the guests. And it dawned on me, right, when I joined Podcasters Paradise, which is John Lee Dumas's, mastermind group, like type thing for podcasters. And he paired me with someone who wanted to start a podcast. The podcast has launched since. It's called The Prison Post. And so we co-mentored each other. But while we were going through this core mentoring, he asked a lot of questions because he was new to podcasting. And I realized that, hey, I know this stuff. But not only did I know this stuff, I knew this stuff because I had gone through the struggles and the frustrations of trying to figure out mics. I burned through 3 mics in my first year. And it's all because I fuss so much over the little things, right? So that's why I talk about don't sweat the tech stuff, because people get hung up on these things. So then I started Tools of the Podcast Trade out of this frustration, out of trying to help others not go through, shorten their learning curve a little bit. And then I started a group, the Newest Podcasters Club, and there people had questions, the same questions I had in my head when I was going through this podcasting thing, right? And so to answer your question, that's my origin story, and that's how Tools of the Podcast.
Yeah, I love that because podcasting is it's a nascent medium, but it's really growing. It's one of the fastest, and it's a great way to build your brand and get your reach. But the issue is it takes work, and so a lot of people are interested, but then they either don't start, they get basically paralysis analysis or analysis paralysis, or they basically start and then they're like, oh, this is too much, and then quit after 4. But it takes time. So that's why. But so one question is, one thing is talking about don't sweat the tech stuff. I've just read this, awesome book is just get started. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it out there, iterate. In tech, in entrepreneurship, it's all about iteration, learning. It's not about getting it perfect. So talk about that.
Yes.
In terms of like how it leads to procrastination.
Yeah, and it does. And I think one of the biggest thing is don't try to be Joe Rogan while you're thinking about starting a podcast. I mean, just don't. Because trust me, you're not gonna get a complex, right? And you're not gonna be able to start. And Seth Godin talk about the lizard brain that will try to come up with any type of excuse not to start. And so I have learned from the experts about not procrastinating. Pat Flynn loves to talk about his first YouTube videos, how awful they were. And so you realize that these guys, they just work through it. They just put it out there and work through it. I listened when I first started planning Solo Moms Talk. Used to listen to Russell Brunson. And Russell Brunson used to be I think it was in his Tesla, recording his podcast episode on his iPhone, and he'll tell you, look guys, there's a wind out there, I got my windows down, and he's recording, and this is what you're listening to. But you're not interested in all that. You're interested in what Russell Brunson is saying. And I say this to say this, that if people are listening to you, yes, so you want to get your podcast, where it's pleasant to listen to. But people are listening to you for what you have to share. They want your message. So they'll forgive you, background noise and other stuff. So just start.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
It reminds me back in when I started mine during March 2020, and like I was in my closet, like echo, like people running around, bad internet, no lights, like no microphone, and it was just and it was horrible. It was just but now you just keep going and going, and people provide feedback, you get followers, like you said, it's the message that people want to listen to your message and follow you. And as long as you're authentic and you're providing value and adjusting it, it's all good. So
yes, definitely. Yeah. And I'd like to say that, now there are so many tools out there, free tools, that you could just record it, upload it to Descript or Auphonic or Adobe Podcast, and they'll clean it up for you. So don't worry about it.
Anyway, yeah, really, that really brings back a lot of like memories and nostalgia 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then the example that you talked about, Joe Rogan, and all these, it's like comparing yourself, like you jump in the pool and you want to become Michael Phelps, and these kids have been like training like when they were babies, so
yeah.
So one thing is, what's like, first thing is just get started, but what's the first thing just aspiring podcasters need to do is just to record the first session, just talk about just getting it out there.
So let me back up first. Everybody said just grab a mic and talk. That's all good and well, right? But I think you need to do a little bit of planning up front. I'd like to talk. I have a nonprofit background, so I like to talk about mission statement. Why are you doing this? Because your why is going to help you when you are frustrated, you're not getting enough listeners, you're not making any money. All the frustrations that come with podcasting are going to come back to bite you if you don't know why you're doing it. And then you're just going to quit and pod fade. If you know why you're doing it, write a mission statement. Doesn't have to be long. And before you record, find out why you're doing it. What is it about? Why, the nuances surrounding your topic, just stuff like that. And it will help you to formulate your plan of action. Then grab that mic. You could grab the Audio Technica. It's very cheap, and you just start to record. And then, a lot of people start with Anchor. I'm not a fan of Anchor, but it helps a lot of new podcasters get started. Just find a host that you could work with and upload your stuff. And, like I tell one lady, just start, just start. And if I may, interject here, even if you haven't started because real reasons, you could start being a guest on other people's podcasts. That's one of those ideas that you could work through your own podcast by going on other people's podcasts and talking about what you want to talk about on your podcast. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, just start guesting, and then you'll find that, as you want to grow your either reach or you want to have more control, then you start to think about hosting. It's kind of this evolution. Guesting is perfect. It's like you don't have to do anything. You just show up, and that's wonderful. I love also what's interesting is, like I've talked to a lot of podcasters. They have like some of them, like they don't have their message like honed like right up front, but over time they hone it and they craft it so it's more sharper, reaches a very narrow audience. And
Mhm.
so yeah, main thing is what you talk about consistency. It's like going to the gym, eating right. It's like just if you do it over and over and over like 3 years, you'll start to see results.
Yes. So that's one of my biggest struggle. Full confession here is that I am a recent retiree. I've been traveling a lot. And so podcasting and publishing, and because I do everything myself, consistent is being a problem for me. So I could talk to it. But if you one of my guests explained it as this, and I can totally relate. If you watch a certain show on television Tuesday night at 7 p.m. every week, and one day you sit on your sofa, you get your coffee and whatever, and you ready, and there's ABC News or something else. How disappointed are you that, the cliffhanger that you left from last week is not being shown this week? You got to watch something else, or there's nothing to watch. And that's how people, your audience, feels when they show up on Apple or Google to try to find this week's episode, the latest episode of your podcast, and there's none because you couldn't publish. So consistency is the key. So that's from the audience standpoint. From your standpoint, the more you do it, like anything else, the better you are at it. You'll learn more things. I learn a lot from editing my podcast, especially the interview podcast, because I learn about my guests and I learn about their topic, their subject matter. So you become an expert within your expertise. So consistency is key.
And yeah, I love that. And that's just kind of the mindset. And we talked a little bit about kind of your message showing up. You talked a little bit about like just the what are the basic like hardware. It's people think it's very complicated, but it's really, you can do it, with very cheap equipment. You don't need to pay $1,000, a couple hundred, maybe, $60. It's like $60 for a mic, tell people about
Yes.
the tech.
Yeah, so I have a MacBook and I'm only familiar with MacBooks, but you could buy something like the Audio Technica, which I'm going to lift it up so you could see it. Not only have the USB, it has the XLR. And the XLR, you could put in something like this solo Focusrite, audio interface. So if you're a techie person, that stuff works for you. But this works for me, right? Where you just get it in, you plug it in, and you record in your MacBook. I've recorded in GarageBand, not the most ideal, but I have. Right now I record with Riverside FM. They record audio and video. They do transcript. You can do clips. So you need a good recording software, somewhere that you could keep your backups, because you want to keep, a record of what you've produced. And I think that's basically it, right? You do want to know where you're distributing your podcast, and your host usually can help you with that. I host with both Buzzsprout and Captivate FM, and they do a great job of distributing your. I think that answers it. But I want to show you something. I have this thing here, which I use. I don't know if you could see it. It's called the J Create. I don't know. But it's a connector. It's a USB-C connector to your MacBook, because you can't plug much into your MacBook, right? Unless you have this connector. So that's something I wanted to say, because it's caused me a lot of consternation. Remember, you need a connector. So that's it. That's it. There's a lot more you could get, but that's it.
It's funny. Like every time I upgrade my Mac, I have to like go to the store to look at it, because they're always changing their inputs and their connections, and you always have to buy these accessories. I'm sure that's why that's why they're probably very
Mhm.
dominant.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
and a good headphones.
Yeah.
Good headphones. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about
Yeah.
sound, lighting, carpeting, away from echoes. Talk a lot about that.
So being somebody who's been in a lot of different places, I've been in Mexico in Airbnb, and I've been in New Westminster, right by where they're building and clanging all the day, all the time. You learn to work with what you have, right? So from a sound standpoint, again, I'm thankful for Descript and Orphonic that you could always upload your audio and get the background cleaned up without too much fuss. The lighting is something, what I do, I just purchased like a cheap ring light from Amazon, and I use that to because I'm in a basement apartment staying with a friend, and so the lighting's not ideal. So and I want to show off my videos, when I guest. So when I have guests, so most things are quite simple to do, right? Once you have your basic, your recording software, and your mic, and you have a place to set up, you could get all fancy. There are panels you could get from Amazon or Alibaba or something, and build out your closet. When I was staying in Canada, my closet was built out, and that's where you could hide from the sound. Sometimes stuff like that distracts you from your main goal, which is produce a podcast that shares your message with your audience.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
Love that. Make the main thing the main thing. You're podcasting, get the content out, record it, just get it out. And over time, you can, I know, colleagues, they started similar. They started in a closet, and then now they have a room where it's a dedicated space. So, but the main thing, execute, get the content out, and just, like I said, it's all about the results. Don't get caught up in the detail. The other question is, you mentioned software, and a lot of the software is free. Like, I know there's upgrades and subscriptions, but basically a Zoom or whatever, StreamYard, you've mentioned podcasting platform, and a lot of the software is like free. So it doesn't really take much. I think you could probably start a podcast with, a couple $100.
Yes.
Be fine. Yeah. So, and then basically creator's message, and then social media, get it out at Podmatch as well. How can people contact you, follow you, reach out to you, etc.?
Okay, so for Solomon's Talk, I'm at Jero on Instagram and Twitter. On Instagram, I'm also at tools_podcast_trade as Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I have 2 channels on YouTube, one for each podcast, Tools of the Podcast Trade, since we're talking about that right here. And I'm also on LinkedIn. And you could reach me at, Jenn at toolsofthepodcasttrade.com.
Yeah. I love that. I love talking to fellow podcasters. It's a really nascent medium, has a lot of potential. Now you don't have to go through standard radio channels, and basically just like YouTube, you don't have to go through television channels. You can start your own. Same thing with podcast, nascent medium, huge potential. And all of Jenn's resources will be in the links in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I like to say that the internet is a great equalizer. Use it.
Yeah, I love
Thank you.
it. Yeah, I love internet.